And I know, thank you for starting the recording. I think that it's a topic that we all need to spend a lot more time thinking about. And I think probably some of you already do. However, I've been hearing and reading a little bit more about this, and I think that Professor Blondell has a lot to offer in this subject. So let me first introduce myself. I'm Ann Smoke. I am from the Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution at the Hawaii State Judiciary, and I'm a trainer, and I manage and administer the appellate mediation program. I also coordinate the outreach events, just like this one we're attending tonight. I want to thank you for joining us today. And this is one of the CADR monthly brown bag sessions. We feature skills for problem solving every month, last Wednesday of the month. And this is in collaboration with our ADR partners, Conflict Resolution Alliance, the Hawaii State Bar Association ADR section, the Spark Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, and the Community Mediation Center statewide, including the Kauai Economic Opportunity Inc. Mediation Program, Ku'ikahi Mediation Center, Maui Mediation Services, the Mediation Center of the Pacific, and West Hawaii Mediation Center. So I just want to let you know that we are recording. Closed captioning, if it's not turned on, I'm going to make sure it's turned on in just a second. And you can access that from your controls if you wish to do that. Today's interview with Stephanie Blondell, Professor Blondell, was previously recorded because we had a scheduling challenge with Professor Blondell. However, we are going to have a brief idea share in the form of a short breakout room following the interview. And I think it's going to be fun. It'll be well worth your time. We're going to start by introducing Jack Moore. Jack, raise your hand. There you go. Jack Moore is an intern with CADR. He's a candidate for the Master's in Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine Straus Institute at the Caruso School of Law. Jack is a recent Pepperdine graduate where he completed the Straus Institute certificate in conflict resolution while he was an undergraduate. His roots, though, are here in Hawaii. Say aloha, Jack, where he lived since he was a small child. He grew up in a military household, and during that period growing up, it instilled in him values of service and duty, but he is inspired by these values and his training at Pepperdine to serve people in conflict through alternative dispute resolution. So it's a great combination. Jack coordinated today's event, and he conducted the interview with Professor Blondell. So I'm going to turn the mic over to him to tell us why he chose this topic and the speaker. And then Jack, will you share more about Professor Blondell before we launch the video?
Absolutely. Mahalo, Ann. So Professor Blondell is a professor at Pepperdine University and will be a professor of mine this fall. I'm excited to be taking her class. And she's known in the ADR space in California and around the world, and I was eager to have her speak, and so glad that she was able to make time for us. I was looking for a topic and a speaker that would have something broadly applicable to all practitioners of ADR and also to attorneys. I turned to Professor Blondell because she is highly knowledgeable in the field of mediation, psychology of conflict, and ADR in general. She teaches mediation theory and practice, psychology of conflict, criminal law, and supervises the Mediation Clinic at Pepperdine University. Professor Blondell also is a lead faculty member for the program Mediating the Litigated Case in Washington, D.C. and internationally. Before joining Pepperdine, Professor Blondell managed a labor management and public policy mediation program serving a tri-county area in Seattle. She also designed and implemented an employment mediation program for the city government. And without further ado, I will be beginning the video interview. Thank you for your patience with technology. Alrighty, is that clearly visible for everyone? Let's get started.
Aloha kako, Professor Blondell. Thank you for coming to present some issues relating to the psychology of conflict to the Hawaii ADR community. And we can jump right in. So can you please tell us what aspects of the psychology of conflict relating to mediator techniques and communication are you presenting today, and why have you chosen to present those aspects?
Well, first of all, Jack, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm grateful to have students who embark on the Masters in Dispute Resolution journey and really go deeply into this material. When Jack asked me to think about those aspects of the psychology of conflict and how it kind of dovetails with mediation that are most relevant to mediators, practicing commercial mediators, community mediators, your entire community. A couple things just came to mind as those concepts I think people are most impacted by. So I've chosen to talk a little bit about empathy, and I've chosen to talk a little bit about the physiology of conflict. We may have time to get to a few other relevant psychological concepts that I think mediators, when they bring their attention to them, help make their interventions more skillful at the table. But we'll start with those two. Empathy is the first, because honestly, empathy is something that we all know, something we all have a lay understanding of, but I think something that few people have a deep understanding of. So that's what I've chosen.
Great, thank you. Let's start with empathy. Can you tell us more about empathy in the context of mediation? What is it exactly?
I think it's an underutilized skill for a couple of reasons. One is that empathy is a communication skill, right? It's something we do at the table. It's part of our active listening arsenal. And excuse me for using a war image as I talk about active listening, but it's used to sometimes connect, sometimes to disarm, right? Empathy is a larger umbrella concept. Empathy is about a frame of mind, and it's also about our positionality as mediators. As mediators, we've been taught often to be neutral or impartial. And depending on who taught you, you may have also included words like multi-partiality or pro-partiality, okay? I am a fan of those latter words. I think that sometimes as mediators, with our mediator persona, if we're being impartial or neutral, we're not connected. We're not connecting in an empathetic way to the people on the other side of the table. A word like multi-partiality captures the persona I think many of us as mediators find to be the most effective. And multi-partial is, I'm going to try and get you on this side of the table what you need, and I'm going to try and get you on the other side of the table what you need. And in that, I'm deeply connected to both. And it requires an empathetic response. So empathy, in terms of the definition of empathy, I'll go ahead and project a definition. This is from DeSetti, and this is just a social science kind of classic definition of empathy that, I think many folks know what the lay term is. I'm struggling for a second here to get my screen up. Bear with me. But here, I think is useful. A complex form of psychological inference in which observation, okay, I'm going to slow down there so you can take it in, memory, knowledge, and reasoning are combined to yield insights into the thoughts and feelings of others. So this is the academic definition of empathy that I love so much, because essentially it's almost saying mind reading, right? A complex, I love that form of psychological inference in which observation, memory, so we're using senses, cognition, and reasoning, so rationale, are combined to yield insights into the thoughts and feelings of others. What we learn about empathy, and what a lot of the research in our field has been about in the last 10 to 15 years, is how we are embedded for empathy. It's actually embedded in the body. It's a physiological experience. So you can look at the concept of mirror neurons, where people actually, know what someone else is experiencing, because we have not only a set of neurons, but a set of mirror neurons. So when I'm watching a movie and I see the on-screen kiss, I might experience it, right? Or the Kodak commercial. I might experience a tear, right? So all of those things are critical to the way that empathy is embedded in the body. Okay, but it's also a persona that says, I'm a person, you're a person. We both have been given a set of neurons. We both have bodies. We are connected physiologically. And because of that, I see you. So there is a way in which we as mediators are most effective when we're communicating to others. I see the emotional experience you're having. Doesn't mean you agree, obviously, all these things that you have been taught. But there is a way that I can do my best mediation work when I have connected to the other person as a human being. So yeah, go ahead, please, Jack.
So then with that, and you were talking about this a little and how you engage your empathy as a mediator, how exactly do mediators put their empathy into practice?
Well, two ways. I think first, just kind of getting to that place where empathy is embedded in the body. One of the things that we know from psychological studies is that you will understand other people better if you actually do something called self-projection of point of view, which is the foundation of the empathy concept, which means you literally go onto the other side of the table and sit with them, right? And you don't need to do it with your body, I said literally, but do it with your mind. So your cognition and your understanding and comprehension of someone will be better if your body is facing the same way that theirs is. If you have kind of literally imagined putting yourself in their shoes, physically or in the mind's eye. So one way that a mediator can use this concept of empathy is by physically positioning themselves when they're not connecting with one of the parties, by physically positioning themselves. Another way is by visually positioning themselves. You know, all of you out there, you're no different than the rest of us, right? This is something that in peer review has held up, and it's true. We just do better. Our cognition is just better. So good. Our comprehension is just better. Good. So that's one way. I think the other way is understanding that the empathetic response does not require you to be overly emotional or to acknowledge their story or to even reinforce their conflict story. Empathy as a moment is the moment that you say, I'm human, you're human. Because of that, I see it. And I think that there's something very simple in that that makes it an active listening skill or technique that people are more willing to practice. Let's think of a divorce case. I may not know what the person on the other side of the table is experiencing, but I do know betrayal, right? So I may not have known betrayal in a relationship, but as a human being, I know the experience of betrayal. So in some way acknowledging that, it might be as simple as, I don't know the particular pain you're feeling right now, but I certainly see that it's betrayal, and I know that that's really rough. Like that moment alone can be enough to have connected to the other party in an empathetic way, which will make you more effective at the table.
Okay. And you got to this a little bit as well about, you know, it being underutilized and empathy being underutilized. Do you think it's largely because mediators worry it'll affect their neutrality and impartiality, which it is maybe should not be the goal?
Yes, I think it's that. I also think it's just a muscle that we haven't been taught and we don't practice. I was training in a 40-hour training school psychologist recently, and believe me, they're great at it. And maybe too great. Maybe they need to learn how to do a few of the X cards, as we call them, the more competitive moves. So I don't want to over-determine its importance. I think that it's an underutilized skill in my classrooms with most of the mediators that I have taught. it is a skill that is not used frequently enough. For lawyers and the commercial litigated case, it has to be veiled, right, into a certain type of language and a certain tone. We all want to be heard. We all want to be understood, correct? So we have to communicate it in the culture that it will be received in. So I'm going back to my school psychologist, that example. An overly therapeutic tone or a syrupy tone would not be effective in many of the mediation rooms in, for example, in California and Century City. You guys can tell me in Hawaii where we would be, in Honolulu somewhere, and where all the mediation boardrooms are. It's not going to be as effective. So you have to think about how to do it. I was taught by someone that I really think has some important things to say, a guy named Mark Goulston, and he's out of UCLA. He's a psychology professor. And this is a book called Talking to Crazy, How to Deal with the Irrational and Impossible People in Your Life. He taught me a skill that he uses in suicidality that I end up teaching my students, and they use in the clinical context when they're learning to be mediators, and I think it's effective. So if the empathetic response doesn't come naturally to you, which many of you it will, right? Okay, so fine. But for those of you that think I struggle to do that or I don't do it, here's a formula that might work for you. He says in suicidality, we often use a format like this. When people are feeling like, and it might be killing themselves, it might be like feeling intrusive negative thoughts, I mean, whatever it is, right? Or when people are thinking of, they are often feeling, and then you give a list. He recommends about 4. So let me put it in the, I'll model it and put it in a mediation context. When people are facing getting kicked out of their home, when they're in an unlawful detainer, they're often feeling mad, scared, anxious, or exhausted. Is it one of those for you? So what you're doing there is you're actually, which is very, very much a kind of more directive mediator style in the commercial case, you're demonstrating your competence, right? People in situations like this, you're saying, I've been in many cases, I've seen a lot of people in pain. There's a certain way that you're communicating to them the empathetic response. I got this process, I can hold you, right? I'm the swaddle. I've seen this before. When people are in an unlawful detainer case, they're often feeling, and then you give them feeling words. And notice the ones I'm putting in there are feeling words, and there was a pause in between each one. Remember your mad, sad, glad. They are important, fundamental words that people use much too infrequently. If you ever struggle to find feeling words, you can go on the internet and just type in feeling words, and it's amazing. You'll find under the word anger that there are several sites that can give you 50 other synonyms for that anger that might fit just a little bit better, right? Because there's that moment in a mediation where if you capture the word, if someone's feeling incensed, it might be different than livid or perturbed, right? Those all 3 might be different. And if you capture the right word, it often is the thing that moves people out of the fight or flight, which we might talk about later, and into being able to do decision making. So that process of giving them the words, pausing, and then opening up the conversation, because you're not saying, I know what you're feeling. You're actually saying, I don't. I'm saying people feel this range. Typically, this is archetypal. People feel these patterns of feelings. This is archetypal. It's one of these. Is it one of those for you? And then it will often start the conversation. And that might be the only empathy you do, an entire commercial case. but it might be the most important moment, right? So I often present that technique because I think it's for people who are not very comfortable incorporating the empathy skill. It gives you a format, it gives you a script basically, and students come back and tell me how much it opened up a mediation. So usually what I hear back is the positive impact that intervention has, normalizes it for the other party, for you, and then you probably start practicing more empathetic interventions at the table.
And thank you for taking that little aside with me. Do you have more on empathy that you want to present on before we move on to the next topic?
Well, I think the only thing that I want to highlight, which maybe I didn't highlight in the beginning, is that empathy is a communication skill at the table, but it's also a part of a mediator persona, right? And it's also a part of what you need in order to get a deal, often. So empathy at its core is the acknowledgement between human to human and the ability to read human to human that I will not be able to get a deal unless the person on the other side gives me the terms I need. And that's true of both of them. And so from a kind of philosophical perspective, I think going deeply into empathy, taking on that persona is an important thing for all of us as mediators to study.
Thank you. And now the next topic you wanted to present on was, conflict and, skills to use in conflict. Can you tell us about, your knowledge of the psychology of conflict and how that impacts you as a mediator?
Sure. So I specifically wanted to talk a little bit about the physiology of conflict, because I think that particular piece, which I touched on in empathy, but that particular piece is underutilized as mediators. Okay, so that experience of understanding what someone might be feeling physically that's keeping them from being able to do good decision making. So I won't go into the fight or flight response because I feel like as mediators, you've been trained to death on this, I suspect, right? So I won't go into a lot of detail, but I'm going to assume you know what fight flight is. One thing that people don't talk about a lot, so I will mention that, is the freeze response. So we think about fight, flight, freeze often as mediators to think about which is showing up at the table. Is someone turning red? Are their eyes dilating? Are all of those things happening? Are they getting ready for a fight? Are they wanting to run away, so they're settling too early? Or are they, and this is what I see in workplace disputes a lot, maybe not in the mediation room, but during the actual dispute, the freeze, right? And we just have not evolved out of it. So as human beings, we're either gonna, the mountain lion's coming over the savannah, we're either gonna run, we're going to pretend to play dead, see if they'll go for new fresh meat, or we're gonna freeze and see if they don't notice us. And I look like the, I don't know what it would be, but the tumbleweed right next to me, right? One of the things that I think is most important is to recognize the impact that the fight response, any of these responses, when someone's going into fight or flight, when there's enough cortisol that's probably dumped into their system as a plate of eggs, as Fred Luskin talks about, which is about 30 seconds, and you have that hormonal intrusion. One of the things that is important is to understand the cycle through which people go through physically so that they can return to the rational brain or decision making. There are a few techniques you can use. I don't want to, over determine this as in like, oh, this is a panacea. But there are a few techniques you can use that I'll go over. So if you're in one of these fight or flight responses where emotions are high, judgment's going to be low. It's not the time to be doing decision making. And yet what we do as mediators is I think we just push people through this. So this is a second skill, I think, to back up empathy, which is empathy happens. Well, so I give an empathetic response. it's likely that people are still going to be in the crisis stage. This takes about, studies would say, and it's different, of course, for every person, but studies would say that this is about an 18-minute cycle. Okay, so it's going to take a while. That's a break. That's usually what you need to do, is take a break. But what can happen, and let me go back one more, actually, what can happen is that people start to go through the recovery, and then there's another stimuli. So they start to go through the recovery, and there's another stimuli. So you can have these fight or flight responses that just last all day, and really this decision making is terrible, and you're asking these amazing reality testing questions, and they point out the weaknesses of their case, and they still give you the wrong answer, right? They still say, well, I'm going to go to trial, and you know they should not go to trial. What this chart actually doesn't show, which is interesting, is after you have one of these fight or flight responses, there's a little depression right here too, where people experience a little mini depression after one of those. And you see these responses. I often am looking for these, because people hide their fight or flight response. I actually think pupils or something. I know this is bizarre, but I actually look at people's pupils quite a bit. And in emergency situation, their pupils would be dilated. The others, you know, you tend to see are red faces and things like that. And we're still mountain lions on the savannah, or rabbits running from the mountain lion, right? We're not supposed to be thinking at that time. We're not supposed to be articulating. We have all the blood go from our brains to our little arms and legs so we can get away. The activities that may engage the neocortex, which is considered the rational part of the brain, like I said, it's not a panacea. Fight or flight is a strong response, but what might help is to think about this suite of activities. One is to put people into sequencing activities. The way you do that as a mediator is you might say, okay, now, you know, I know this is, let's say it's a class action. I know this is a class action. There's several different issues that have been raised here, and let's put those issues in order of importance. Or let's look at the various aspects of the class. And you may be asking them to do something that you absolutely know the answer to, right? But that sequencing activity is something that will often soothe. So you can be a little bit of, you know, Valium for folks, and calm them down a bit. Listing is similar, right? You can use visuals and actually get people engaged and up on a board to organize something. Put it in order. Perception of stimuli is an interesting one. I think that courageous mediators use this one quite a bit. It's where you're actually doing one of those techniques, like put your feet on the ground. Can you feel your, you know, your 10 toes on the ground? Can you feel your breath going in and out? Can you find 3 purple things in the room? Can you hear the fan? Those things. I mean, hopefully as I'm doing it, you can start to feel how it does bring people out of that fight or flight, or at least into a calmer state. The thing about perception of stimuli is, in an open session, I think it would be kind of odd for the commercial case, but I think in certain types of group disputes, it can be a part of a process. It can be part of a ritual. You're doing restorative circles. There's all sorts of ways that it might be useful there. In caucus, I think you just have to be courageous to do it. I see how upsetting this is. One of the things that I've found that helps is, and you know, just put yourself out there. I mean, that's part of the job description of any mediator or any trainer, really. I'm going to be the person at the front of the room that asks you to do stuff that's a little bit wacky, right? And that you're going to judge me. Go ahead, project all over me, right? I'm up for it. And as the mediator, you have to be willing to. I know you're still trying to keep your market. And my experience is that people that are willing to take those kind of courageous and bold acts increase their market often. So as long as you can embody it in your own persona. Sorting and problem solving are 2 others that are pretty self-explanatory, but I think that knowledge can be really helpful in keeping your mediation efficient, by pacing the right activities at the right time. Because if you're going to continue to try and get someone to say that, yeah, they only have a 20% chance of winning at trial or overcoming summary judgment or whatever it's going to be, and they're in fight or flight, well, good luck. You know, the next 10 minutes is going to be real fun as a mediator. So think about what you can do that will be productive, because you can't break every 5 minutes either. That's another thing you can't do, is break every 5 minutes.
Right. And, you know, you said that the perception of stimuli, that it's almost like a mindfulness exercise, you know, maybe not usable in, or at least in an open session, a commercial case. But do you think that, you know, any party who's sufficiently worked up in any dispute, they could probably benefit from at least something like that? You know,
Yeah, I do, Jack. I mean, it's so interesting. I think one tool I have is I kind of mirror the other person. So if the other person sounds open to it, I'll go for it, right? Without any apology at all. You know, there's no self-consciousness at all. If they even reference how they have a meditation practice or how they were so nervous coming before they were doing X or Y, you know, I'll just jump in. But if not, I think that's where this becomes artistry, right? How do I capture the attention of the advocate who's actually the one having the problem, who doesn't think they're having the, you know, who shouldn't be, that we should be thinking about the principal here. We should be thinking about their client, but the advocate who somehow is triggered. How can I actually bring those mindfulness techniques to that person and help slow them down, and have it be received? So, and part of it might be, you might start, I mean, I hate slow talkers, honestly. It drives me nuts, but I might become a bit of a slow talker. I might, you know, ask them to do something, a task. Oh, I'm really distracted with talking to your client here. I hadn't heard this part of the story. Do you mind? You know, I mean, would you mind opening up the peanuts? I mean, I know it's ridiculous, but there are certain ways that you can bring mindfulness practices into the room without it being obvious. And that's the fun of it, right? That's the fun of it.
Okay.
And, you know, you can also say we should change the culture so that mindfulness is not seen as something wacky in the mediation room. But I'm going to be honest with you, if I'm reflecting back what is instead of what should be, I think it is seen sometimes as a little wacky.
Yeah. And you spoke about, you know, the fight, flight, and freeze. And I think a lot of people might forget about freeze and, you know, not realize that that could happen in a mediation. You know, it sounds like it's sort of a hump that you have to get people over, but you might not want to be too brute force about it. What is a technique that can be used to, I mean, it probably happens especially when you're so close to a final agreement and there's just one sticking point, or people are caught up and they're unsure. What's something that can help get over that hump?
Get over the freeze? Well, first of all, to recognize freeze in the room, I think is important. So it can look like disengagement. It can look like someone on their phone. It can look like someone who's very tired. It can look like someone who's not super, when I say like not engaged, like then sometimes, you know, your mind might go to judgments. They're not following what we're saying. They're not smart. They're not, this is over their heads. That, I mean, there's all sorts of, you know, labels that you might put on that. So I think the first piece is kind of recognizing what it might look like. And it might be all of those things I just said. Maybe they're not very interested. But I think addressing it as if it is a freeze can be helpful. So some techniques to address it as if it is a freeze is to ask, how's the process going? I noticed, you can do an observation. I noticed that when we started talking about X, I noticed we stopped hearing as much from you. And this technique might be more useful in a community mediation or in a pro se, pro per environment type thing, maybe a divorce or something. I noticed we stopped hearing from you, and I miss I miss hearing from you. How you doing? You know, one of those things. So it's more of an observation. If it's someone that would feel self-conscious by that observation, I wouldn't make it. But if I thought that that might be the opening, I would give it a try. So, and you'll see this more in those types of disputes that show up as, you know, highly emotional, because I've been working with schools recently. I'm thinking of, you know, IEP mediations, or a due process kind of, if people are talking about their child and their child's education in a disability context, those are high emotion disputes, right? And so then it might be a really helpful technique.
Well, thank you for addressing that as well. And I think there was, if you've covered all that, there's something else you wanted to talk about, and that's the problem of memory error. Can you expand how what that is and how that arises and impacts a mediation?
Well, you know, I think that this is like a teaser to another talk, because I think it's a very interesting concept, and one that would take a long time to unfurl. But the short version is this. We are what's called promiscuous coders, which means we go through a day and we take in so much information into these big old brains of ours, but we don't know which information is going to be relevant. So all of this information goes in, and only later do we find out what's relevant. And because of that, we're inaccurate. There's one memory scientist that says, you know, our brains would need to be a mile wide in order to actually take in the type of information and to have accurate memory. And yet our perception is that we have fabulous memories, right? Some of the more radical memory scientists would say that there's really no difference between memory and cognition, right? We think of it as it happened, it goes in, it's saved, it's retrieved, and yet it's retrieved. This is oversimplified, but you know, my memory of something that happened in high school with a teacher lives right next to my memory, perhaps of something that happened in high school in the yearbook room, right? And the detail, they kind of get smushed together, and yet we don't know that. So what we do know is eyewitness memory is horrible, and fairly unreliable, in part. So part of understanding memory error as a mediator is it's a tool to our own neutrality and impartiality, because if we are listening for the what happened conversation, we're probably going to miss the identity conversation or the interest identification that will settle the case. So I think understanding how bad we are at memory recall is important. I know probably a lot of divorce mediators have already like lived and breathed this, but I think our recall for a conversation is like 8% or something accuracy. So that he said, she said, they said, those moments are not where it's at. Now, in the room with parties, I sometimes actually go there. It depends. And I'm very cautious with how I do. But more than that, it's just my own knowing that helps me know where not to spend time and where to move on and do other types of interventions that will be successful and will get me to settlement.
Thank you. And can you also give us, you train a lot of new mediators, but you also, you know, you train people who have practiced in in a field for a while and have, you know, are going to become mediators. Can you tell us about issues that new mediators have, especially with communication, where
Sure.
they might falter there?
Yep. My career has been in training mediators. So table skills. So I started out training people in certification in Washington State, in training lawyers and non-lawyers in the mediation skill sets. And then I became a clinical teacher. And now, you know, we have our LLM program, all these programs where I get to see new mediators. I would say that by far there's probably 4 or 5 really common mistakes, but by far, the number one common mistake is someone sees something to reality test and they do it. And instead, I think my, biggest learning is you see something to reality test about, write it down and put it in your back pocket, save it. It's almost never the right time to use it. The moment you see it is almost never the right time to use it. And in the more evaluative, directive mediation style, where someone's paying for the competence of the mediator and the subject matter, right? It's still true. It's still true that you need something to work with when you close. And not only that, but it will be much more powerful if placed in a series of questions and over time. So I think it's just like a scratch that people have. It's like an itch, and they want to scratch. It's like, I see it, so I want to do it. And it's almost always the wrong time. That's just a little bit of observation from the field.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Professor Blondell. I think that's all your time available, and we thank you so much for the generous gift of your time. Mahalo nui loa, and we really hope to hear from you again soon.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's been my pleasure. Thank you to the Hawaii mediation community.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Oh, you're muted, Anne.
I was going to say we would certainly all be thanking Stephanie, I think, for that very informative talk. And thank you, Jack, for the great interview and the good questions. I loved the application that came into it. I love some real specific examples that she offered. So now, as the trainer, I'm going to ask you to all do that uncomfortable thing, although it's not so wacky because we've all done it before. I think it's a good time for all of us to go into a short breakout room for just to share some ideas. And Jack is going to give you the discussion topic right after I go over a few breakout room ground rules. So here they are. So first, there's going to be about probably 7 to 8 minutes for discussion. Each person should have about 2 minutes to share. So just keep in mind the airtime that you're using, okay? And make sure everybody's got equal. If you don't plan to participate, please don't accept the invitation, because we don't want anybody sitting by themselves in a breakout room. So we can better manage the room if we don't see a name that looks like it's in a room and they're not live. So if you're not planning on participating, just don't accept the invitation, and we'll make sure we can manage it so there are at least 3, possibly 4 people in some of the rooms. Be brief, be open, make note of anything that you might want to share with the larger group when we return. And we'll have a very brief plenary where if anybody wants to share anything, you're welcome to do that. So Jack, I'll turn it over to you.
Right on, thank you. So I just put the question in the chat. When have you encountered one of the phenomena Professor Blondell explored: empathy, fight, flight, freeze, memory error, or reality testing too soon? And how did you overcome it? There's also something mentioned in the chat, question raised. And if you have a question, you've talked and you've explored that topic, and you want to discuss more, you want to do a little free-form discussion, feel free. Enjoy this time with your colleagues and your peers. Without further ado, I think the breakout rooms are ready, so we will send you off.
Talia?
Yes.
Auto close the rooms. We'll close them because we have a little bit more time for people to chat. So I'm going to join a room and I'll come back if it seems like that discussion is dying out. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Can you just pop me in a room because I didn't see an invitation. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Everybody, first I want to thank Jack. I want to thank for the great interview. I want to thank you all for coming today. Talia, thank you for making operations run smoothly today. If you liked what you saw today, I want you to save Wednesday, August 31st in your calendars, because we're offering a very special event called The Emotional and Psychological Aspects of Mediation and Their Ethical Implications. The featured speakers are Dr./Professor Stephen Solmeyer, and he's a mediator and arbitrator and a clinical psychologist. And we will have him with Judge Lynn Duryea, a JAMS mediator, arbitrator, referee, special master. So that will be with 3 local specialists: Lisa Jacobs of Pona Divorce, Justice James Duffy, and Stanley Majka. I hope I'm saying that right, Stanley. I hope I'm saying that right. Anyway, if you've registered for today's event, you're going to receive an invitation to that event, and it's very likely going to include 2 CLE credits for those of you who are concerned or care about that. So I want to thank you all again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all sometime soon.
Thank
Hello?
you so much, Ann, Talia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, thank you. Bring
Thank
her back.
you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank
Bring
you.
Blondell back.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Aloha, everybody.